Our next talk has a provocative title, How to Invent 5 Conlangs in 45 Minutes. I've heard that a lot of people are looking forward to this. So everybody, this is our presenter, Njenfalgar.
Well, I must say it's the first time I'm giving a talk where people are actually interested, so it's a bit nervous. So, what my talk is going to be about, well, I imagine everybody can imagine 5 Conlangs in 45 minutes. It won't be Conlangs of the size of Boon or Heron or all the other languages. It will basically be sketch language. And well, the reason why this is interesting, for example, if you're inventing a very nice Conlang with lots of words and a lot of history behind it and everything, of course now and then this Conlang might have borrowed words from other cultures, and then of course, to do it correctly, you should invent the language of these other cultures. And well, then of course, it becomes a lot of work because at the end you're inventing hundreds of languages because it's other languages, it's also borrowed other languages. And to invent 7,000 languages within your lifetime is maybe a bit tough. So, so the point of these of the sketch language I will show is to give a quick and dirty way of construct just the necessary material of some other Conlang, which then your language can borrow words from. And another use for these quick languages is, for example, if you're writing a novel with some elves, some dwarves, some other races, and well, of course, these guys, they need names. Like, it's a bit stupid to give an elf a name like Johnny, or, you know, it should be like elfish sounding. But of course, you want some consistency in these names, and so the right way to do it, of course, would be to invent full Conlang, but not everybody has time to invent all the Conlangs necessary for just, you know, if you're writing a little novel. Sometimes you have other things to do as well. So you can invent a naming language, basically, and I will show how to make it even advanced enough that you can translate some interesting sayings that you can spice up your novel with. As a note, I actually know what I'm talking about because I counted them, and I have already invented more than 100 Conlangs, and most of them are sketch langs. So, well, how many people do it is you take, for example, English and you relax it by changing some sounds. There's one way to do it, of course. And actually, I have read explanations of professional writers saying that, hey, that's the way I do it. So, of course, they can get away with it, so why not? Another way is you can make it more Latin-like sounding, that's also always fancy. And then, of course, to make it more elfic, you can add some L's. Of course, there should be some more, and there should be some more in these because it makes it like fancy, like. And well, okay, you have kind of something that looks like another language. So, but you can actually take it one step further. Basically, the same thing. Instead of taking English and mangling it, you take some more obscure language and you mangle that one. For example, you can take very nice language, Korean, that, well, has been extinct, but there is some information about it on the net. You can just search that information, take some words, some endings, you mangle them, so well, you just change them a little, and well, then of course, we have a new language, which our fantasy race. But of course, a real Conlang won't do that. So we can do it a little bit, just a little bit more advanced. So how to do that is, instead of taking one language, is take several languages. Like you take several languages, Netlangs, about which you can find information on the internet. You can take some languages you like or some languages you don't like, depending on what you want to do with it. And then you take several elements of these languages, like you take the morphology of one language, the phonology of another one, and then you put these different elements of these different languages together. And then the only thing you still have to do is flesh it out, invent some words, translate the names and phrases you need for whatever your purposes are, and then you just have a new language. So, in practice, one thing I have discovered that is quite useful is first decide all the things you need, and then actually invent your language, and you're more focused. Like, I found that very often when in these sketch languages, you need some names, of course, of people, and then eventually some nouns very often for cultural stuff. You very rarely need verbs. So if you discover that that's the case for you as well, well, you can skip verb morphology. So first you try to get an idea of what you need. Of course, if afterwards you discover you need more, you can try to fix it. But, well, let's say that in our case, of course, we need the name of the language, because well, otherwise we can't say the elves speak this or that language. So it's quite necessary to know the name of the language. And of course, some, let's say, characters' names, and then some wise saying we want one of our characters to pronounce, and then some random words that another Conlang can borrow from this Conlang, like, well, you know, for example, some animals and some other words. So, okay, once that has been established, let's take some Outlandish. Now there, Wikipedia is really a wonderful thing. Before Wikipedia existed, it would have been quite tough to invent all these languages in a good way. Of course, you can put a lot of time in it and make real Conlangs, etc., etc. But now that Wikipedia exists, you can just do it much more efficiently. Like, for example, we need, of course, a list of phonemes. So we search some nice language, and this is Njenfalgar, a language from Northwestern America, which is quite famous for its phonotactics, in that it allows huge consonant clusters with no vowels anywhere inside. But okay, let's not make it too complicated. Don't take phonotactics. Just take the list of phonemes. It's quite nice one. I don't know if you can read it from there, but okay, there's some, well, a lot of things in the throat, some ejectives and everything like that, and just a simple three-vowel system. And now, for phonotactics, let's take another language. For example, Mandarin, which has these nice syllables starting with consonant and a vowel, sometimes diphthongs consisting of two vowels, then eventually ending with a nasal, but it cannot be M nasal because, well, apparently they don't like it. So in the case of Njenfalgar, the only nasal that is not M is N. So good. Now the thing of Mandarin is it also has, for example, tonal sandhi, like the tones of one word influence the tones of the others, but Njenfalgar doesn't have tones, so that's easy. For the grammar, let's take yet another language like Kiswahili. It's well, we all know at least two words of Kiswahili, I suppose. And well, just going through Wikipedia and clicking on some links, you can find some courses teaching Kiswahili or thinking they teach Kiswahili. Actually, this course kind of sucks because it explains the grammar in a quite scholarly way and it does not do anything pedagogical, which is perfect for our purposes. So you just read through this thing and then you get some idea of how it works. And to spice it up, let's add some Japanese politeness, just for good measure. So now we have all that, we can start inventing some words. We just take some sounds of Njenfalgar, put them together in the Mandarin way, and okay, then we have this root word. We can add some class prefixes, like these are Kiswahili numbers for classes. Of course, if you want to make appendices in your best-selling novel, maybe give them other names to obscure the fact that it's actually completely ripped up from Swahili. But okay, refer here, we can say it. So now we have the name of the language. I just made up a transcription on the spot. Transcribing is a different art in which let's go here. So now we have the Shapinsui language, which is spoken in the country of Apinsui by the people called Apinsui. So good. Now we need some names for people. Now very often names don't mean anything. Like, well, maybe the name David used to mean something, but it's like a couple of thousand years ago. Now it doesn't mean anything anymore. But let's say that in our own culture, names mean something. So, well, I just have invented some words to derive names from here. Like these two, I've inspired on some Vietnamese names. Minh is undoubtedly a Vietnamese name that is known quite well because there are a lot of them called like this. It actually means bright, as you can find in some dictionaries. So there's a nice word for bright, which has given rise to the name Atun. And then there's a girl's name no one's discovered, which is also quite nice. It means velvet. I don't know if my current culture has velvet, but let's say it does. So, of course, a king is called lion. So now we have this nice setting where the handsome Khotun will recite poetry by King Njenfalgar to win the heart of the pretty Amao. So now we need just some more words to actually say what the poetry is. Okay, and well, there's some of the animal names I mentioned which have been invented. Like you recognize this prefix here, which is a class, which is the class prefix the class these words belong to. You can just, clicking on some more links, find Swahili dictionaries where you can see all how it works. And you can just copy paste it here. And well, there's some other stuff like, okay, the masu particle from Japanese, I imitated with Swahili uses infixes to make the susoi here, it's an infix. And for the rest, well, I don't know if there's anything interesting here. And then the only thing that's left is actually translates the phrase that you want, and this gives this result. So, of course, we can do that. So in this first example, I took the phonology, or the phonotactics actually, from one language. Actually, we can mix several of them. So, for example, take Hawaiian, which is a very nice language with a very simple, yes, he's studying, he likes Hawaiian. But it has a very minimal consonant inventory, like they don't even make the difference between T and K. So we can take that as a basis for the phonemes of our new language. Let's spice it up with something else, like for example, some clicks. Here's a click inventory of Kung, which, well, it goes on for a couple of pages more. But, well, okay, let's see if we can combine these two things. So, of course, one thing with Hawaiian is it has very few phonemes, so we want very few clicks. Otherwise, it won't be too well. Maybe you can make language with lots of clicks and nothing else, basically. It would also be nice. But, okay, let's say we will have a little of everything. So we need few clicks. We go again to Google Wikipedia. Apparently, the Denzel and all the other clicks are the most popular. Almost all languages with clicks uses them, except for the ones which only have one click. So, good. Then that's settled. We'll have the Denzel and then the other click. And of course, clicks can have different ways of articulation. They can be voiced, voiceless, aspirated, nasal, and everything. Of course, Hawaiian doesn't have much, so we won't have much either. We will have nasals and not plain normal. So this gives basically this nice inventory. But that's of course just consonants. The vowels can be taken from another language yet. Another language again. Because, well, very often languages, there is much correlation between consonant inventories and vowel inventories apparently among languages of the world. Some languages have much of both, little of both, because there are languages with lots of consonants and little vowels. I suppose we have all heard about the Greek language, at least several times. So let's say another language for vowels, like, why not French vowels? It's a nice language. It's very well tested, so it's easy to find information about it in case you didn't already speak it fluently. And hey, why not let's add some tones? And for that, we take the very famous language of Piraha. So there's not only discussion about the grammar of Piraha, but also about the tones. However, it writes them well, so I copied the average version of Piraha, which is just a few accents to mark high tone and nothing to mark the simple tone, the low tone, which is unknown. So, good. So now we have all that, we would think, okay, let's do the same with, for example, syntax. Take two different languages like Japanese, which has, well, this is something that, like in Japanese syntax, like that's come before objects, just like when you use English genitive with apostrophe s. This has postpositions in comparative and superlative constructions, which we heard a lot about this morning already. The stamp always comes in front of the comparative and superlative, is the final, etc., etc. And then let's make some Welsh to it. Then, well, have noun plus adjective, noun plus noun, auxiliary plus verb, etc. Now, then you write this novel, you post on your blog, like, hey, I mean, this wonderful language. The syntax is a mix of Japanese and Welsh. Now, someone is bound to complain that Japanese is strictly left branching, Welsh is strictly right branching, so you should mix these two things. So, well, of course, if you have enough time on your hands to make this particular Conlang, you can flesh it out and see, do more research to see if it works, etc., etc. But, well, the premise of my talk is that we don't have all this time. So, and unless you know what you're doing, you shouldn't just mix languages that are completely different. So, a better idea is just to take one language, like Basque, it's also a fun language, and just take it out. And you might say, hey, it's the same. Yes, okay, it's the same. But the story behind it is more like something you can post in your blog and be proud of, and nobody will complain then anymore. So then the only thing left is flesh out the language. Well, there's this one thing with, well, sometimes you need to build words like make compound words because not a lot of words are derived. And then, but there's one thing I've discovered, and it's tough to find etymologies for many languages. Like if you don't speak a language, it's tough to know how they express certain words, how they are built and the like. But I've also discovered that if you take one sufficiently exotic language, it can give you ideas for etymologies for hundreds of Conlangs. So in my case, I happen to know Vietnamese quite well, so I've taken some more of Vietnamese. For example, the name of a language in Vietnamese appears to mean the noise of the Vietnamese name. So in this case, well, I have this name of, let's say, some islands in the Pacific, Sipone, and noise is new, so the name of the language should be Sipone, the noise of Sipone. And, well, I have some more names, of course. Naming language should contain names because that's what they're made for. Well, a girl's name for Vietnamese girls are names Orchid. You don't know the orchids in the Pacific, but let's say they're there. And but if you run out of inspiration for names, you can always do like they tend to do in Vietnam, it's number their kids. So like Inge is, well, apparently the second kid of this family. So, and then we have some nice word list for this language. So there are some loanwords that come from Shapinsui. Like, well, this one is one for the mod thing. Well, and then furthermore, one thing is of note, for example, is for example, one would think to make some complicated construction with compound name words with derived suffixes and the like. Now it happens that in Vietnamese it's just monomorphemic, and this basically is. So I copied that, and then, well, the verb to be, as I said, it's not often you need verbs in naming languages, but now and then you do. And the nice thing about verb to be is that if you only need one form of it, you just make up a random thing. It doesn't have to have any morphology inside it, like the verb, well, verb to be tends to be very irregular, so one form has nothing to do with the other. That's a very nice thing about verb to be. Other verbs are even more complicated, but I will come back to that later. And then the word fun is also a fun word. So I made up this nice little way of expressing this, tole. Now, if you go to Vietnamese, you see that Vietnamese has this nice thing called reduplication. And it has different forms, but in the word fun, it does this. Basically, it throws after a nonsense syllable that happens to rhyme or alliterate with it, as long as it sounds cool, then you're very happy. So high becomes higher, and it's nice alliteration. So to have it alliterate with tole, you make it tole kuku. So it's a fun word. And then, well, the word but is also a cool word in Vietnamese. Of course, they have a normal word, which I have copy-pasted to make ao in Thikoninu. And but they also have the loan words, which is learned from Chinese. So here, of course, it would be a loan word from Shapinzui. And furthermore, Vietnamese is a third word for but, which is both these words put together. So now we have Lanat Xiao, just to express the word but. And then, well, then we only need to translate some poetry. Dùng vì cái hết tiền là cười lên theo tôi chỉ có một cái. Okay, but then there's one thing that's a little more complicated in languages, and it's sound changes and the like, which tend to make words irregular. But very often they are still transparent. So if you want to have some nice names in your novel or in the Conlang that's borrowing from this particular Conlang, sometimes there will be different words that clearly are related, but in ways that can only be understood fully if you go deeper into it. And to have such things in a sketch language, it's a little more advanced. So if you want to do things like English is fond of doing, I think you're out of luck. You would have to actually go through all the work and do all the sound changes. But there are many languages in the world that are more transparent. Like if you look at regular verbs in Japanese, usually, but with just a very limited set of sound changes, you can explain it all. And maybe Japanese actually went through something much more complicated. But if you want to invent a Japanese-type language, you don't have to go all through the complicated stuff. You can just go through things that actually show in the language. And so there's one more example I have made up for you here. So, well, of course, we first need some phonemes. I have taken phonemes of the Hmong language of Southeastern Asia, which I happen to like as well. It has, well, it's quite some funny stuff, like reflexes, uvulus, and all this stuff. And then I've taken some sound changes that happen in the Kinyarwanda language of Central Africa, which I happened to stumble upon once trying to, just get to know some more stuff about language. Actually, it was more interesting than I thought. It's how it happens often. So what happens there basically is that, well, it's an agglutinative language, and syllables are just consonant plus vowel. But then the consonant is actually, it isn't always there, so it can just be a vowel as well. Another thing that happens is that if two vowels are sequent, then well, so morphological, so some stuff happens. And then, for example, U will of course turn into W, so word, which is kind of a common thing. But then there's the next step. This W will actually be pronounced in a more complicated way, which is reflected in the right column here. It will actually turn into Hof-Vela. So for example, the cluster R plus W is pronounced Rwa. Like there's a G coming into it. So actually the name of the country should not be pronounced Rwanda, but Rwanda. And well, if we then use this, and well, we make up some particles, root words, and we put them together, then well, you might think, of course, it's completely right, it's completely by, I didn't make it happen that there's so much ooze followed by house, of course. But now what happens now is that these ooze turn into W's and they get some velarization. And then we get the name of the language, which is some nice G's thrown in places where you wouldn't expect them. Another thing that also happens in languages is that, well, for example, if they take a lot of loans from other languages, is that the phonology changes. Like this language apparently loaned so many words from Thikoninu that now it's sort of including place. So basically, the consonant inventory now would be Hmong plus some place, which can also be a nice idea to spice up your language with sounds that, weren't there originally. And then if you want to go really outlandish, well, one first thing is, if you want outlandish phonologies, apparently you don't have to search that at all. You just have to take some nice little language and explore its dialects. Like Dutch, maybe for some people Dutch has a very weird phonology with uvulars and all kinds of strange diphthongs.
Yes.
No, it is. It's a very normal language. But actually it has some dialects that are way more Outlandish. Like, this is based on the Western Flemish dialect with a version of Ostend. And so it has much nicer consonant clusters. It has basically one nasal and some retroflex sibilants followed by H. Always followed by H. You can't have retroflex without an H following. So, and now let's say that for some reason we would need a lot of verbs. Maybe we'd like to have some sufficiently irregular verbal conjugation, but not just draw something out of thin air, something that is based on 5,000 years of horrible sound changes. Well, you could of course stay 5,000 years and do all the sound changes, but let's say, I don't know how much time I have left, but you want to stay within time. So, well, the thing is, what you then do is, well, first you just make some regular verb endings, like the verb to cover is conjugated past tense with some gerund form with ch, and then you again, let's say, and then let's say that these verbs to be, of course, has to be irregular, otherwise it would be quite strange. And well, let's say these are some other irregular verbs we would like to have. What you can then do is search a language that has sufficiently similar structure and that is sufficiently regular to your taste, and then you can just apply, just rip it off. You just look what that language is doing, and you do the same. So, well, one advice I can give is, if you do this, maybe you should always take your documentation with you, otherwise people might say, no, this is not naturalistic, this is way over it. Like recently happened with Njenfalgar on the Conlangs list. He ripped off something of what I was telling people say, no, it's not naturalistic. So, well, it happens. So, of course, you all know what language I ripped this off of. So, of course, now it's your turn to work. I have some written assignments here for you to do during lunch. After lunch, of course, you're all heading into me. And I hope you will have a lot of fun finding out what conjugation for linking actually means. So, and that's conclude my talk. So thank you.
I'm curious about one thing. How big should a language be, in your opinion, to be a language? Or, in other words, how do you define a language?
Well, if you want a real language, then of course it should be quite big. But, well, I think there's an entire continuum from sketchlangs to real languages, and all of the languages in between can have some uses. So that's where you draw the line of what is actually a real language. Of course, it's up to personal taste, I think.
Yeah. Okay. You saw what is mentioned in the That was just rhetorical.
But my rhetorical question is, Manchu is essentially disappeared, I understand, except for a small vocabulary. Is that still a real language or not, rhetorically?
Well, it wouldn't be a living language anymore, but it's still a dead language. So.
It was funny because something you said early in the talk, it reminded me of a comment from a friend of John Quixote's. I don't know if you know John Quixote created the eighth foil language. And he has a friend who's apparently very, very smart, but doesn't value things beyond practicality. So what he said was, he was describing how for Game of Thrones, they created a show, or a language for it. And his friend was just completely baffled by this. He said, well, why didn't they just basically recode English? And he said, well, no, you don't necessarily need to do that. And it was like, well, but if that's not realistic, why don't they just use a language that nobody knows? Like, why don't they take an African language and just use that? And John Quixote kept going back and forth and could never convince him. He just didn't see the practicality of it. He thought, Just take something that nobody knows and just throw that up there. That'll do.
Yes.
So I had a question. So you created over 100 of these sketch languages. Well, what, if anything, either do you do with them or do you plan to do with them?
Well, yes, in my free time, I write stuff like things that could turn into novels one day and the like, but well, I haven't anything published yet, so I can't say I'm actually a writer. But maybe one day I would be. So.
No, you can say you're a writer, you can't say you're an author.
Yes,
You are a writer, definitely. So, and all of these are done while you're working.
And where is Penha National Castle?
In Portugal. It's in the near city of Sintra. So that's where I would train right from Lisbon.
Oh gosh, now I'm really curious to see it. All right, were there any other questions back there?
Yes.
Wait, okay.
Hi. When I started to practice clicks,
Yes.
I found my fellow people wondering whether I was actually what I was actually doing. Did you also, well, get strange views when you started clicking around you?
Well, actually, I started to do clicks when my mother just came from Southern Africa, so it was kind of expected in the family at that point because she could make the clicks, we all had to make them as well. So.
All right, thank you very much.